Speaking of little green men, that pretty much started back in 1955. There was an incident that happened in Kentucky that had 11 witnesses to it, by the way, and it's never been debunked, although there's been many attempts by people, or some people have proclaimed that it did not happen, but they never really were able to debunk it. It's never been debunked. It's been known by a couple of different titles, but it's usually called the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. Basically, it was an event that took place in a small town called Kelly, like a rural community near a little bigger town called Hopkinsville, where actually the sheriff from Hopkinsville got involved, and other police. But anyway, there's an article here that's written. There's actually an article, but there's also there's a 200-page report that was done in 1956. Some people investigated it, and actually it was one person investigated it and wrote a 200-page report. And I'll leave the links for both the article and the report. The report's much more interesting because it gives you all the details. But here's an article from history.com. And it's called How the Little Green Men Phenomenon Began on a Kentucky Farm. Basically, why are aliens... This is the article, and it's written by Volker Jansen. And it reads, why are aliens so often depicted as little green men with bulbous heads and oversized eyes? The mythology began in part on the night of August 21st, 1955, when a large extended farm family called the Suttons arrived breathlessly at the Hopkinsville police station in southwestern Kentucky. Their story of a terrifying siege of otherworldly beings would become one of the most detailed and baffling accounts of an alien close encounter on record. Notable for the large number of witnesses, nearly a dozen, the duration of the encounter, several hours, and the close proximity between the witnesses and creatures, sometimes just a few feet away. The incident quickly became regional and even national news. The alleged encounter occurred on the Suttons' farm in the tiny rural hamlet of Kelly, Kentucky, where the family lived in an unpainted 3-room house without running water, telephone, radio, TV, or books. Of all the details of their story, the UFO landing and the appearance of small alien creatures, one fact is indisputable. When the 8 adults and 3 children arrived at the nearby Hopkinsville police station at about 11 p.m., they were genuinely terror-struck. These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help, Police Chief Russell Greenwell later told investigators. What they do is reach for their guns. Yet, here they were, women and children, hysterical, and one man with a pulse of 140 beats per minute, measured by an investigator. Okay. According to accounts given to the police, at about 7 p.m. on the hot Sunday evening, Sutton family friend Billy Ray Taylor was fetching water from the backyard well when he saw a silvery object, real bright, with an exhaust all the colors of the rainbow. As he later recounted, it came silently toward the house, passed over it, stopped in the air, and then dropped straight to the ground. Taylor, 21, and his 18-year-old wife had come from Pennsylvania to visit Lucky Sutton, with whom he had worked on a traveling carnival. The Suttons, 50-year-old widow and matriarch Glennie Langford, her 2 older sons and their wives, a brother-in-law, and the widow's 3 younger children, didn't take Billy Ray seriously, laughing off his UFO account. An hour later, alerted by the dog's incessant barking, Lucky and Billy Ray went to the back door and made out a strange glow, in the midst of which they spied a small humanoid creature. About 3.5 feet tall, it had an oversized head, almost perfectly round, its arms extended almost to the ground, its hands had talons, and its oversized eyes glowed with a yellowish light. The body gave off an eerie shimmer in the light of the night's new moon, they said, as if made of silver metal. Terrified, the 2 men grabbed a 20-gauge shotgun and a .22 rifle and fired at the little man, its hands now raised as if held up at gunpoint as it came toward the back door. They reported that it then did a flip, scrambled upright, and fled into the darkness. Shortly after, the men saw a similar creature appear in a side window and fired through the window screen. Still impervious to bullets, the little man again flipped, then disappeared. I went out in the hallway and crouched down next to Billy when I saw one approaching the door, Mrs. Langford told Isabel Davis, author of an extensive report called Close Encounter at Kelly and Others of 1955. It looked like a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. It was shimmering bright metal like on my refrigerator. The drama escalated when Taylor stepped outside under the small overhanging roof, and those behind him saw a claw-like hand reach down and touch his hair. The group screamed and pulled Taylor back while Lucky shot above the overhang and then at another similar creature in a nearby tree. It floated to the ground and then scurried into the woods. The Suttons moved inside and spent several hours listening for movements, hearing mostly occasional scratches on the roof. At 11 p.m., the whole group ran for their cars and hightailed it to the Hopkinsville police station at top speed. After the local police chief called for backup, his team was joined at the Sutton farm by state police, military police from nearby Fort Campbell, and a photographer from the Kentucky New Era. There, investigators found shell casings from the gunshots, but no other evidence. Neither could they find proof of heavy drinking. According to the Sutton matriarch, liquor was not allowed in the farmhouse. Once the police and others left, though, the creatures returned between 2:30 a.m. and daybreak. Mrs. Langford said she saw one glowing repeatedly by her bedside window, its claw-like hand on the screen. In the following days, after radio stations and newspapers, including the New York Times, reported the incident, hundreds of curiosity seekers descended on the farm, often ridiculing the Suttons as ignorant or fraudulent. When no trespassing signs proved useless at discouraging them, the family tried charging admission, 50 cents for entering the grounds, $1 for information, 10 for taking pictures. After that, skeptics blasted them as fortune-seeking fabulists. As the Kelly story spread into the world, it took on a life of its own. The number of little men grew to a dozen or more. A few years later, the little metallic men were conflated with an Eastern Kentucky woman's report of a flying saucer and a 6-foot tall man in green, helped launching the myth of little green men. The day after the incident, police investigators returned to the farmhouse, searching for evidence of a saucer landing, footprints, blood trails, or scratch marks on the roof. They found nothing. Bud Ledwich, a local radio station employee, interviewed the adult eyewitnesses and made drawings based on their accounts. According to Davis, he was impressed by the remarkable specificity and consistency, even though the men were away from the farmhouse all day, unable to coordinate with the others. While the incident eventually attracted the attention of the Air Force UFO investigation program, Project Blue Book, documents suggest that its team never officially pursued the matter, beyond checking in with their Fort Campbell counterparts who had been briefly at the scene the first night. One of the most thorough investigations of the Kelly incident was undertaken in 1956 by ufologist Isabel Davis, which, by the way, I will include her report in this, and you could read it. It's very, very interesting. And published several decades later by the Center for UFO Studies, a group founded by astronomer Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Project Blue Book's civilian investigator. Her nearly 200-page report, co-written with Ted Blocher, includes detailed maps, drawings, documentary records, summaries of similar accounts around the world, and interviews with several Sutton family members and police investigators. Davis summarized the latter's concern about the lack of physical evidence, but to her reckoning, none of the possible explanations, a deliberate hoax, a publicity play, group hallucinations, made sense. While questions arose about whether the young men were exaggerating, possibly fueled by hidden stores of liquor, Davis's strong impression after meeting Mrs. Langford was one of a somber, no-nonsense matriarch who abhorred the limelight and had no reason to lie. None of the witnesses, Davis noticed, had any history of making preposterous allegations. In 2006, Joe Nichols, senior research fellow of the International Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and a self-styled paranormal investigator, reviewed the accumulated evidence in an article entitled Siege of the Little Green Men, the 1955 Kelly, Kentucky incident. In it, he raised suspicion about what he called Billy Taylor's embroidered testimony. He matched Taylor's UFO sighting with similar reports from that day, which suggested a small meteor in the vicinity. As for the little men, Nichol floated an explanation used for other alien encounters. Owls. In particular, the great horned owl, aka the hoot owl, has long wings that could be mistaken for arms, along with talons, yellow eyes, long ears, and round head that might also matched the little men description. As for their metallic shine, Nichols suggests they could have easily been reflecting moonlight. But while hoot owls are known to be active at dusk and extremely aggressive when defending their nest, some investigators question characterizations of the creatures as hostile. To some, their behavior that night in Kelly appeared to be simply curious. Now, Joe Nichols doesn't know what he's talking about here. Owls? Okay, where was the evidence? Where was it? There should have been a dead owl. These guys were shooting guns at shotgun at these things point blank. At one point, when they shot one, it sounded like it was hitting metal, sounded like if you shot a bucket. And these things would, when you shoot at them, they would float to the ground and then scurry away. Well, what kind of owl does that? There was no owl feathers that anybody talked about discovering. There was nothing like that. There were no dead owls. Okay. There was a UFO that was hovering over the house, stopped over the house that somebody saw, and then it landed. And then these things showed up. But what was this all about? Well, I mean, you never, if you look at the images of these things, if you see what one of these things looked like, the drawing, it doesn't look like anything else from any of the other stories that you hear about, for the most part, that I know of. I mean, there could be other people that saw these things, but as far as I know, I've never heard another story that had beings that looked like this. So what was it? Why? How? And why would they act so strange? Like, if you're from outer space, obviously you're highly intelligent. You're just going to go traipsing up to some house filled with humans and try to interact with them in somehow, and they start shooting at you, and yet you just keep coming back for more. You know, you think about this. It seems that, is it possible that this was some sort of an experiment? That these beings actually, maybe they were, like controlled remotely by other beings. Let's experiment with this group of people in this house and see what happens. We're going to send in these phony little robots, and see what happens. Indestructible robots, by the way, or maybe they were holograms. Who knows? Was this possibly some sort of an experiment to just check out what human reaction would be if they were faced with some unknown being all of a sudden out of the clear blue? What would they do? Well, obviously, these people were shooting at them all night long. In fact, if you read the report, it was a lot of shooting directly at these things. In fact, later on, after the police left and one of these things showed up at this Mrs. Langford's window, one of the guys there shot at it again through the window. There were pictures, in the papers the next day of all the bullet holes that were in the house. I mean, so in the windows. Okay, so these things were getting shot at, in some instances at point blank range, but yet they somehow didn't die. And they just kept on coming back. And apparently the most that they ever saw at the same time was only 2. So nobody really knows how many were really there. Was it 2 or 3 maybe? But it's a very interesting, what happened here. I think it's possible that this could have been some sort of an experiment. If it's not, then maybe it's some one-of-a-kind incident. But I mean, again, you have a saucer. There was drawings. There were drawings here of your traditional kind of saucer that was seen in the area, and there was actually other people in the area that saw this saucer. Saw a saucer that night flying around. It wasn't just meteors like Joe Nichols talking about. Reports of meteors. Again, that's you just make that proclamation. Well, I don't have any other explanation other than we'll say it's owls. Because I just don't believe that there's beings from other planets coming here. But nobody's ever successfully debunked this story, and these people were sincere. The matriarch, Mrs. Langford, was basically a person that would not lie, according to all the sheriff. A lot of people made statements about the woman, about this matriarch of the family, that she wasn't the type who would be given into a hoax, that would be part of something like that. So if you take it that this really happened and these creatures really showed up, why were they there? That's where we are. It's never been solved. Were these actual beings? Were these different from these other beings that are reported all the time? Were this is just some species that decided to come check this out, and this is what they do? This is how they act, and they're impervious to weapons, to our weapons, or was it some sort of an experiment? I don't know. I think it could have been an experiment. I'm leaning toward that. I believe that, I believe that this incident happened. I don't believe that there were owls that were showing up. If there was owls, there would have been some dead ones, right? At least one dead one, right? If you're shooting at point blank, anything's going to die with a shotgun. So yes, I think this could have been an experiment. Doesn't make me right. Could have been actual just beings that act. This is how they act. This is what they do. I don't know. But they had claw-like hands, and actually, come to think of it, the claw-like hand is very similar to what I saw in that shadow that time when I had an experience back in the 70s when I was a kid. And when there was something in my room, I never got to see what it looked like. I only saw the shadow of its arm and its hand. And was it one of these things? Maybe, I don't know. The thing I saw only had 3 fingers. Looking at these drawings, it looks like 4. Looks like they had 4 fingers. 4 talisman. I don't know. Who knows? How many different kinds of things are coming here? It makes you wonder if this was an isolated event, an isolated species that's visiting here. So makes you wonder just how many different things are here. If that's in fact what it was, or was it like I'm thinking it might be? It might be that these things were part of a experiment. Okay. Look at this. We found this family home here. I wonder, did they know that these people had guns? Did they want to see what would happen? I mean, did they know the danger that might be presented to them? And they just wanted to see. Okay, let's see how far we can take this. It's very interesting what was going on that night in in Kelly, near Hopkinsville. What happened? But I just don't believe that it was owls. Again, there would have been, if you shoot something at point blank range, it's going to be dead. So I guess it's just one of those mysteries that's just going to linger out there. We're probably never going to get a true answer of what this was, but it could have been an experiment. It could have, when you really think about it, it could have been some sort of weird experiment. Like say the Greys are sitting in that flying saucer and they send out these things via they're mechanical or somehow remotely controlled. Or maybe they're holograms. Who knows? But these things did seem to not like light. Like they didn't want to be in the light. They didn't like light for some reason. The people, the witnesses, got the feeling that these beings were afraid of light and would try to avoid it. So anyway, I highly suggest you read this report that's included. That I will leave the link for. It's very, very interesting. And I think you'll enjoy it.